Okay, so this is the Kashtira branded deck that got 4th or 5th place last season on the rated ladder. And I wanted to try it out. This is card for card the exact list. I haven't made any changes to this. And I've been testing this. The replays you've seen in this video are from this exact list. I'm just testing exactly their card choices to see how I liked it. And overall, my impression is that this is actually kind of good. I think it's kind of good. I guess I'll start with the Kashtira card since that's the most obvious thing about this deck, like why are they here? The reason why I think the Kashtira cards are good in Branded is because Kashtiras are just good right now in general. There's a lot of hand traps in the format. Snake Eye is playing a lot of hand traps. Tempai is playing a lot of hand traps. White Forest is playing as many as it can. And any other deck that wants to compete is usually doing so with hand traps. There's just a lot of hand traps, right? And Kashtira plays very well into hand traps. Unicorn especially. If you start your turn with a special summon of Unicorn, you basically have insulation, or like compensation, I should say, for any other monster hand trap on your main line. Right, so your main branded plays, if these get hand trapped with Vela or Ash, then Unicorn is going to punish your opponent. And Unicorn is really good right now because taking away a card out of the extra deck is just good against a lot of decks. It's actually kind of punishing. You can cut off the Fiendsmith engine by taking Sequence or Requiem. Usually that does a good job of taking away the whole Fiendsmith engine. And if you get to use this twice on your turn to punish a hand trap, and then again on your opponent's turn when they start playing with their engine, then you're going to get to rip 2 cards, which is extra good. Right? You can take away the Fiendsmith card first, and then you can take away their deck's secondary engine, or their main engine, right? So if it's Tia, you can take away Kit Colossus. If it's Snake Eye, you can take away Princess. White Forest, you can take away Baron if you wanted to. And if it's Tempai, and you get to resolve this twice, then you can take away both Bident Dragons, which is pretty much a game over, right? I'm pretty sure Tempai is going to really struggle to OTK you. I don't see any line where they can OTK you without Bident Dragon. At least not without like a lot of engine. So this is really, really good. You can also take Transcendent if that's relevant against Tempai. And what I think is even more good about these Kashtira cards, or what like makes them even better into hand traps, is that they're even good into Maxi and Fuelos. Because most people do not Maxi or Fuelos in the draw phase. They will let you summon the Kashtira first. And even if they did Fuelos in the standby phase, it's not like this card gives a draw to Fuelos. It doesn't, doesn't draw for Fuelos. And if they don't Maxi, then this card is going to get to cheat itself out, basically. Same for Fenrir. You also get the free birth, which is an extra bonus disruption. Against a lot of decks, this is actually really good. Against the mirror match, this is a phenomenal disruption. But against Snake Eye, it can be okay. Against Tempai, it's pretty bad, unfortunately. But against White Forest and Snake Eye, this is playable. And you get it for free. You get to sneak it in through hand traps, through Maxi. And that's basically it. There's not really any synergy with the branded engine itself. It's just that they fit in, right? They don't take your normal summon, they don't lock you, there's nothing about this, they don't summon from the extra deck, so there's no conflict with the locks in branded. They're just good cards in the format, and I think that's why throwing them into this deck actually just improves the chances of this deck. Whenever you go first and you draw these, it's way better. Your hand is just way better. Branded typically doesn't need all 5 cards to play, so having one of these cards be like a Unicorn, or like a Fenrir, or a Planet, is actually just a really good bonus, because, yeah, it just insulates the rest of your hand. You can also technically get a bit of consistency out of these cards, although I didn't really ever use them like this, maybe once or twice. And that's for Verte, because you can special summon, it's a free summon. Any normal summon then goes to Verte. Right, so if you start with Unicorn, you search for Birth, and then you go normal summon Albert and they hand trap you, then you can go Verte right away. You don't need to find any other extender like a Bestial, right, or a Kit in order to get to Verte. You just have the Unicorn available, and because of the way Birth works, you can obviously bring it straight back, so you don't even lose this effect as a disruption. So it's very, very good at making Verte as well, if you get completely stopped on your branded engine. So yeah, that's the Kashtira cards. I think they were very, very good. Birth is a card that I sometimes thought about searching and then just discarding instead of activating it, because you don't typically get rid of your unicorn or your Fenrir. Your unicorn, I guess, that's how you get to birth. You don't typically get rid of it from the field, and you don't empty your field again, so it's very hard to like play with the multiple Kashtiras. You really just summon unicorn and then benefit from this effect, but sometimes that is good enough. And if you don't need to discard this, you can just put it on your end board for that extra disruption. But yeah, it is worth noting that sometimes, because Branded does require a lot of discards, unicorn being able to search for a card that you can discard is something to keep in mind. It's not just a spell that you put on the field, this can just be a discard in your hand. So yeah, that's it for the Kashtira cards. The second most notable thing about this list is that it's playing Dark Ruler and Droplets, right? So it's a Boardbreaker approach, and there's actually 0 hand traps other than Bestials. So this is a very Boardbreaker approach to Branded, and that is surprising considering that I just said that it's like a hand trap format, right? Every deck is playing hand traps, Tenpai's on a lot of hand traps, Snake Eye's playing hand traps. So surely hand traps are good, right? Well, I thought that this was a good idea just simply because Droplets and Dark Ruler are specifically kind of good right now, because the White Forest end board and the Snake Eye end board is predominantly on the board, right? Like, it's monsters that get negated by Dark Ruler and Droplets, so it's like Appaloosa, Desiree, Caesar, that kind of thing, right? Baron, Diabell, and there's only like a few disruptions in the main lines from those decks that actually exist outside of the field, right? So for White Forest, it would be the Trap card. This is a card that they have that plays through Dark Ruler. And then for Snake Eye, it would be Princess, right? This is like the disruption that they have in the graveyard. Everything else is on the board for the most part. So you have really good value from activating Dark Ruler, really good value from activating Droplets. It is worth noting that Desiree can sometimes negate Dark Ruler, because if they chain anything else, like an Imperm, or I guess it would be the White Forest Trap, right? The Woes. This would be the card that they often chain to Dark Ruler so that they can then chain Desiree to negate your Dark Ruler. That is a play that exists. But if they don't have that, the Dark Ruler is crazy, and against Snake Eye, this is usually always pretty good as well. And then there's also Droplets, which is a similar card. I think these are pretty good, especially when you combine them with the powerful board breaking engine that Branded has. If you severely cripple their end board, take away so many of the disruptions, then Branded has an easy time walking through, you know, just a Woes or just a Princess. It's very, very easy to walk through. And at that point, the biggest concern would be hand traps. So I really did like this Boardbreaker approach. I thought that it worked pretty well. Because there's no hand traps, and because we're relying specifically on drawing specific board breakers, Allure of Darkness actually makes sense in this deck. You can say I have a Royal Allure of Darkness now. If you've seen my guide, my 20-hour guide to Branded, you may recall that I really didn't like this card, and I generally don't like this card. I think it's pretty bad in Branded. The only time where I think it makes sense to play is in exactly this kind of build, where you're not playing hand traps and you're trying to draw specific board breakers that are good against the boards. Allure of Darkness is a kind of card that I don't think people are incentivized to negate going second, right? Like, you wouldn't commit a Sylvia or a Desiree to this, or Baron. You would just let this resolve, most likely. And that helps you find these cards. Thrust also is a card that I was skeptical of, because I thought that with the amount of Omni negates on the end board, Thrust would just be kind of pointless, because it doesn't matter what you search, you're never resolving it, right? Branded Fusion or Grass, you're never resolving it. However, if you have Dark Ruler in your deck, then you can actually search for this, and then your opponent is punished for not negating Thrust, right? And Thrust is a card that doesn't always get negated, because a lot of opponents think that they can just negate the card that you search, and that will be good enough, that will be better, right? Because they're not playing into a second copy. If it's an Omni negate like Baron, they're going to play into a second Thrust if they negate Thrust. So they sometimes respect that, and then you get to search for Dark Ruler, which is interesting. And honestly, even more than that, Thrust ended up being good just because you push through the negates, right? You use the Dark Ruler, the Droplets, the Allure, your engine, whatever, Kashtiras, to actually like push through the Omni negates. and then Thrust still resolves. So it's actually not bad in this build, or in this format, I should say. Initially, I was skeptical of this card, but it turns out that it's fine. And of course, going first, setting duplication is still really strong. It works really well into the hand trap formats, especially Tenpai. So yeah, Thrust ended up being really good. And because Thrust is really good, I think it makes sense to stay on 60 cards so that you can search for Grass as a board breaker that's even stronger than Branded Fusion, like an engine board breaker. So initially, I again thought that Branded could be smaller this format in order to draw certain cards. But no, I think 60 is still the way because Grass is still pretty good. Thrust for Grass is still pretty good, and there's a lot of engine that you want to fit in this deck. Yeah, so I like the way that this deck worked with the Boardbreakers and the Kashtiras. It was really, really good. So moving on to some specific card choices, you'll notice that there's a few choices here that don't normally line up with the way I like to play Branded. There's one Quem, which makes sense if you don't want to draw it, because it is kind of a bad draw. It's not the most powerful card in the world. But generally, you like to have two, because it's more comfortable to just have a second Quem, right? Being able to summon one with Titanic Lad in your turn, and then have the second one available for Grand Guignol on your opponent's turn. That is something that I really appreciate having access to, and I often find myself thinking that it's just necessary to have two Quem, otherwise you're just annoyed about the way your deck works. The Golden Sword Soul, though, is a way of slightly mitigating that. This is similar to the one Cartesia as well. The Golden Sword Soul is a way of having extra copies of these two cards. In a way, this card is kind of either of these. It doesn't search them, so it's kind of hard to understand what I mean here, but like in practice, you find that this card allows you to summon one of these, which gives you access to one of these in a situation where you normally wouldn't. So if you imagine just resolving like a first turn combo but then getting stopped, and then you go Thrust, set dupe. What you can do is dupe for Branded Fusion, go for Albion, and you can send the Golden Sword Soul from your deck to the graveyard. Albion will then trigger, which banishes, which triggers the Golden Sword Soul. And then this can special summon a Cartesia from your hand, or a Quem from your hand, and that is a situation which, you know, those cards would ordinarily be completely dead, they're just follow-up at that point, but the Golden Sword Soul allows you to get them into play, right? And this can summon from the graveyard as well, so even if you've been through them on turn 1, or you discard them, the Sword Soul can get them back. So yeah, in practice, this card mitigates the downside of playing just one Quem and just one Cartesia. One Cartesia is fine anyway. I've always liked Cartesia at 1, but particularly Quem I thought was suspicious at 1, but after playing with the Golden Sword Soul, I realized this card actually just helps. And I really like the use of this card. I think you can do some very creative things with this card. This first effect is not that relevant. Don't make the mistake of thinking that this is a Tenpai counter. It's not. It's really not. Negating one attack is not a Tenpai counter. But it's the second effect, which lets you get access to Cartesias and Quems out of nowhere, basically. It happened a couple times in the video, I think, but like something that comes up is using Mercuria to actually search on your opponent's turn for a Quem or for a Cartesia, and then using the Golden Sword Soul to actually summon it from your hand in order to just have access to another play, another disruption on your opponent's turn, seemingly out of nowhere. So that's why I like these cards. I like playing 1/1/1. It keeps the card quality high enough. I think there's a very good focus in this deck on card quality. You'll notice that like the Unicorn is a very high quality card. Allure, Dark Ruler, Dropless, these are very high value cards. And a lot of the cards that are subpar have been cut down, right? So that's why Quem is down to 1, Cartesia is down to 1, even Albaz is down to 2, which is a decision that I thought was a little strange, but again, after playing with it, it is completely fine. Even though I think in general 3 Albaz is better for Branded, in this particular format, I think solving the issue that like third Albaz solves is less important than solving your more high priority issues, which is actually drawing a playable hand that beats enough hand traps, right? Like you have to draw playable enough. Like you can't draw too many bad draws like Quems and Albaz. So I think solving an issue like that is just more important. So I actually really liked playing the double Albaz. If you ever play games against Tenpai, it's like you don't need a third one for a grind game. It comes up a little bit with duplication, because often you can go through 2 Albaz turn 1, but because of Lubellion recycling them, you can often like make do even if you do have to go through both of them. So yeah, I actually liked the double Albaz here, and I don't think I put a third one in. Some other card choices, there is one deployment. I think this goes in line with what I'm saying about the Albaz and the Quem. This is actually a relatively subpar draw. I know that sounds really crazy. In general, this is like so good in branded, but going second, this is hardly a board breaker. It's just not powerful enough. Decks like have more disruptions than you have cards sometimes, and like at least half of those are genuine negates, like actual omni negates a lot of the time. So like a card like Fusion Deployment is hardly good. Summoning Albaz to then discard another card just to bait a negate is really poor. Summoning Cartesia is often really poor because, I mean, it doesn't do anything, right? It just trades for 1 Appaloosa negate, and at that point it's a vanilla monster. I didn't feel like this card made a lot of sense. And going first, it plays really hard into Fuelos, it plays really hard into Maxi, which are very popular. It's very annoying to play this deck, start with Fusion Deployment, and then get Fuelost, because it feels like an unnecessarily harsh punish, right? So I actually thought that this card was better out of the deck. I might not even play it at all, if I'm completely honest. I'm not sure why this list chose to play 1. Maybe they just couldn't think of a better card to play. We're kind of maxing out on good starters and extenders. But I did like this card at 1 when I drew it, but I definitely found myself appreciating not drawing too many, right? Because it plays very hard into Fuelos and Maxi. So this card being at 1 looks a bit weird, but I think it's more likely to go out of this deck than to be like bumped up to 3. So I liked it for now. I think I'll leave it at 1 for now. It is technically a Verte target, but I'm really not convinced that that's why the player included this. I think it's just in here because there's 1 extra slot, and this is definitely a viable card in branded. But I definitely could see an argument that it plays too hard into hand traps turn 1, like Maxi and Fuelos. And going second, it's like hardly contributing to much of a board break because, you know, it's just not strong enough. Some other card choices, things like maxing out on Shrouded and Lubellion. I think this is reasonable. Same for Saranir. You're just making sure that you have high spirits targets, good discards for opening, and just a variety of powerful draws in general. Lubellion is a high quality draw. Going second, Saranir is technically a hand trap. Same for Magnamut, and Bestials are relatively good right now. They do stop Fiendsmith. They stop White Forest a little bit. They conflict with the Kashtiras, but I think that's fine in 60 cards. You really only have 4 Kashtiras and 4 Bestials, and you can sort of make do in a lot of situations. If you have the Bestial and you also have a Kashtira, you can make do, right? Like, if you don't want to summon the Kashtira going second, that's fine. You can just use it as a discard for like droplets or opening or something. This card is mainly like for going first anyway. That's where the Kashtiras really get their power. So you might as well play the Bestials, no reason to cut down on them just for the Kashtira cards. I like that there's a second Retribution. I think this comes up a lot. The fact that there's only 1 Albion target, which is branded in red, means that very often a second Retribution comes up as your Albion target. If you ever draw or search for branded in red, then this is probably going to be your set with Albion, right? It could be opening or high spirits, but you know, this is just a disruption, so like this is the cleanest second option that you can go for. There's no banishment or branded king, so I really like playing 2. The extra deck is where I actually think this list slightly falls from perfect a little bit, which is I don't really agree with the Lulu. I liked the Lulu, it is pretty good, but I thought it is slightly too awkward as a Grand Grenol target because of the way it conflicts with Lubellion. Lubellion locks you for the rest of the turn into fusions. I thought that Lulu, obviously you're locked on your own turn if you resolve branded fusion, so that takes away some use as a board breaker for Lulu Willilith, or I should say the second effect of Grand Grenol. this doesn't get used as a board breaker. It really only summons Quam, which is good. It helps to summon Quam into a board, but having that extra option of summoning a fusion monster instead of Lulu would be, you know, better than not having it, right? I thought that having a disruption, an actual disruption from this card is valuable, and that might be what the player was thinking. But it turns out that I just didn't appreciate it. I would much rather have, I think, either Quiritis, but maybe Praskinian as well. I've been thinking Praskinian is pretty good in this format. This card works better when you play Super Poly, and this list is not playing Super Poly, but this is still a relatively good card. There's a lot of Barons in the format, and this card is really good against Baron specifically, because if you ever do get to resolve a Grand Granole, suddenly this card beats Baron in a fight, and then it revives it from the graveyard, right? So it's really, really good at dealing with specifically Baron. It's good against SP as well. You can attack over SP and then revive it, like good things to revive from your opponent's graveyard. So yeah, this card would be pretty good. Either that or Quiritis. Either or, I think, is the right way to go about it. But definitely not Lulu. Lulu was fine, but I think the other two choices are better. And then when it comes to Sprint is really nice. Like, the fact that there's no Super Poly gives this deck a little bit more space in the extra deck. That's why it's playing Sanctifier and Sprint. Sprint makes some sense because there's a lot of Kashtira in the format right now, so being able to fuse with these cards is nice. Right, Unicorn can be fused into Titaniclad, but Titaniclad often gets used turn 1, and if it's Fenrir, then you can't make Titaniclad, right? It's not big enough. So Sprint kind of fills in the gaps there. This card really helps with that specifically. But overall, I didn't really use Sprint that much, and I feel like a more important card to play would be the Light and Darkness Dragon. In my opinion, I think it would make sense to play Light and Darkness Dragon as well as Banishment. Right? Sometimes I felt a very distinct lack of a second target for Albion. This card was a bit clunky, and Banishment would have just been very clean. Right? Just having this in a grind game to just revive a Mirror Jade from the graveyard, and having it as an option turn 1 for Light and Darkness Dragon felt like it was missing in this deck. I didn't feel like it cost too many games, but I definitely think having access to a stronger 1-card combo with just Alba is better. I think that this card is good to play. So overall, I think I would change the list by taking out Sprint and playing Light and Darkness Dragon. And I think I would add in a Banishment into the main deck, and I would look for something to take out. I'm not thrilled about taking out any card and putting in another brick. I really don't like that. I don't want to cut an Allure. I think the Allures were good. I think the double Mercurio was good. It works well with Allure. I don't want to cut any of these down. And if I was to cut any card down, it might be just the opening to 2. Like this, just because opening is pretty poor into hand traps. But it's generally better in an Allure build because you can search for Tragedy and then banish for the Allure, so that's a nice little combo. But yeah, opening on its own is probably the worst starter, so I would probably have to cut opening to make room for banishment. And this is kind of how I would play the deck, I think. I would also swap out Lulu, actually, for a better Despia. And I think I'm going to try Praskinian in this format. So this is pretty much the exact same deck, but I've just changed it ever so slightly to include some choices that I think are more effective. Mainly the fact that you just have banishment. It's mainly banishment. This is the one change that I think is most important. So yeah, that's my opinion on Kashtira Branded. I think this is actually a very good way to play the deck. And in general, I think I'm queuing this build if I want to play Branded. I think I'm queuing this build right now. It was very, very effective and very fun. So yeah, thanks for watching.